In today's episode, Ryan tells us how not to build. This episode is packed with hard-earned product wisdom. We talk about, number one, how my opinion and your opinion don't really matter, but there is one that does. Number two, how not to fall in love with your idea. And number three, we talk about the $7.9 trillion idea that Ryan is now setting out to tackle. Ryan is a serial entrepreneur and founder at Stones AI, where he is transforming compliance implementation from months to weeks through AI-driven automation and blockchain verification. As with all my guests, I learned a ton from Ryan. If you learn just one thing from today's episode, do me a favor and share it. Share it with someone you think will benefit from Ryan's perspective. This is episode 9 of How Not to Build. Well, but I definitely don't want you in the camera, but you have a good voice.
Yeah, you do have a good voice. Absolutely. That's awesome.
Just cover the face.
That's great.
No. All right, well, dude.
Cool.
Ryan, thanks for being here.
Yeah, man. Let's do this. I'm excited.
What are you glad about?
What am I glad about? There's a lot of things to be really glad about. I have a lot of good things going on personally, a lot of good things going on professionally. And in my personal life, my son has finally taken to a sport. So he's really into jiu-jitsu, which is amazing because it's going to teach him discipline. We went through like all the sports. We tried soccer, we tried baseball, I guess it'd been like t-ball or whatever. Yeah. What else did we try? We tried a couple other things. He hated it. He would just like be on the field like playing with worms or looking at butterflies, or like didn't care at all. We got into jiu-jitsu and it's hard, it pushes him, but he's like, you know, he's already got his first stripe on his belt. He's like super into it. He wants to go all the time. It's great. He is 6, about to be 7. He'll be 7 in a month. Month today's, March 28th. So that's really cool. March 28th is his birthday. It's a month from today.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah, so that's really good. And then we're going to Scotland in May for a 2-week trip, and I am so excited. I've never been to Scotland. I cannot wait.
Why Scotland?
Well, a few reasons. One, I love Scotch. Yeah. That is a vice, and I have to keep myself from drinking too much. The bigger part of it is that we're going with a few other couples, but it's adults only. So my kids are staying with my parents. And then we're going for 2 weeks with some other couples, just going to go around, and we're going to go hiking up in the mountains, going to go to a bunch of different distilleries.
Awesome. Go
see Edinburgh for a while. It's going to be great. I'm so excited. And then professionally, got a lot of good things going on. Got a new startup that's kicking off and getting a lot of traction going. We just this week got 3 new clients, which is really cool. Got some investors interested in what we're trying to do. A lot of really good things going on in that place, and just overall, life is good, man.
Awesome. Good to hear. Is there anything that you are anxious about?
Everything, because I'm an anxious person.
Are you?
Oh yeah, like that's why I get up and go to the gym every morning, because otherwise I am my worst enemy. I will be in my head and like I kind of battle with depression a little bit. So I get up and like go do physical adversity for an hour and a half every morning, because that voluntary adversity is like really important for like, if that's the hardest thing you do in the day, the rest of the day makes it seem not so bad, but yeah, I mean, like, this new startup, the idea, we may or may not get into it on this podcast, and maybe we'll do another one specifically around it. We can figure that out, but I am unbelievably bullish about it and confident, and it also scares the crap out of me, because like what we're trying to do is so grandiose and so big, and it's like very counter to all the things we'll probably talk about today, which is like the right things to do from a product perspective and how you take products to market. We're not necessarily breaking those rules, but we sort of are breaking those rules in some degrees. And so I know that we're breaking them, and that makes me anxious, because I kind of know that I'm breaking some of like the rules that you're not supposed to.
Isn't it like the rules of grammar though?
I'm hoping.
Like you're allowed to break it as long as you know what the rule is and why you're breaking it.
That is my hope.
Yeah.
We'll see if that works. That's how I'm hoping it works out. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, dude, I'm excited to get to that part.
Yeah.
We'll get there later though.
Yeah, cool.
You gotta wait. You gotta continue listening, watching. Let's see. Well, I mean, that kind of goes right into the final question, which is, what are you hopeful about
Yeah, I mean, obviously this startup working really well. I guess this is a good time. I'll give a little segue into it. So what we're trying to do, the company is called Stones AI. What we're trying to do with Stones AI is, and I'm going to use a word that my co-founder hates when I do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. We're trying to really revolutionize the way GRC is done. So GRC, for anybody that might not know, is governance, risk, and compliance, which is not a sexy thing to go after. And that's actually why I like it, because we're doing something that's really cool in a very non-sexy field that is traditionally lagging behind market from a technology perspective. And fundamentally, I'm not going to get too much into the weeds because we may do that later, but fundamentally what we're really trying to do is provide universal access to everything related to GRC. So think regulations, laws, court rulings, standards, and frameworks all in one place, as well as provide like unprecedented transparency it's never happened in the GRC space. And we think if we can pull it off, if we can hit our lofty goals that we have, then we could fundamentally change the way governments do laws, do regulations, put regulations out, provide that to the people, and the way then companies then interpret those laws and show proof that they're compliant with them. Yeah, regulations, everything like that.
Is that you talk about transparency and stuff, and I think I was also thinking accessibility. Is the main problem there that for a normie like me to understand all the compliance and
by the way, I'm a normie too. Yeah. I do not know that much about GRC. That's why I have a head of compliance, because that
probably makes you look good. You have the right perspective of I don't know, solving your own problem to some degree. Yeah. Sounds like. But so I mean, is the issue just everything is so complex, you're trying to make it accessible? Okay. And then transparency, is all the data out there? Again, people just don't know how to read it and apply.
Yeah. So
is there an actual data problem too, as far as availability?
Yeah, so talk about the problem space really quick. So globally, there is estimates. I don't think you can find this anywhere, and so whether or not this is accurate, I don't know. But I think it's in the ballpark of accurate, plus or minus a margin of error. But it's roughly a $7.9 trillion compliance waste problem. And what that means is, and what I mean by compliance waste is just excess excess processes, excess human labor, excess spend in different things to make sure that regulations are put in place, are then promoted to people, made it available to people, and then companies and people can be compliant with those regulations. Okay. And that's at the global level, right? So now that's a huge problem, right? I don't have anticipations that we're going to capture all of that market. There's no way to do that. But when you kind of and it's a super complex problem. When you talk about 7.9 trillion, that's endlessly complex, right? Of all of the different places. And there's lots and lots of businesses that go after that problem. But ultimately, what we've done studying this for a little over a year now is it really boils down to access, and what I mean by access is, if you want to know, so let's say you have a company and you're in the United States and you want to open a shop in the UK or Peru, or I don't know, pick a new place. You want to move, expanding globally, and you want to go figure out what do I need to do to be compliant there so I can do business there, not get sued, whatever it might be, not get in trouble. You're going to end up going to a whole bunch of different disparate systems that don't talk to each other. To find out what you need to do. And then even from there, you may or may not get all of the information depending on who you're working with. If you're going through an intermediary like a consultant or something, or if you're going directly with the government. And then on top of that, then you have to take that and then interpret what that might mean for you, right? So in essence, what we want to do is compile all of that information, all those regulations into one, I'm calling it centralized kind of repository. I'm being very careful not to use the word database because it's probably going to be a ton of different databases, but one central knowledge base, and then put a network of LLMs on top of it to make it accessible, make it easier for people to access that information. And then the transparency comes from adding this blockchain verification process kind of as the fundamentals. So that way, that and our LLMs are being trained and being set to zero hallucination. And that's really grandiose, really lofty. But the reason that we're doing that is because what we're doing is basically pulling back. So you come in and put in a query, because it's going to look like ChatGPT, simple chat interface. And from your other podcast I was listening to, he was talking about how great that is. And I was like, yeah, it is great because it's super simple. We're trying to keep the interface very, very simple. And so you can go there and be like, hey, here's I can type in my business profile, or maybe at some point we'll have a business profile that you can actually add into the settings. But in the beginning, like, here's what my business does. I'm moving my business into Peru. What do I need to be concerned about? And instead of like giving a traditional LLM answer, what we're going to do is pull forward all of the regulations that it feels like could be relevant to you with citations and then links to where you can go get that information. And then provide, snippets from those things that, like, this is probably relevant for you. This is probably relevant. This is probably relevant. So it's just a very transparent, like, hey, this is what the regulations say. Here's where it is. You can go look at it and then go from there. And then
I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's a super useful feature. I know, like, I think Perplexity was maybe one of the first ones to start doing that.
Yep. That's where I love Perplexity. It is like my favorite LLM. I love it to death.
I love that so much, because even though the amount of times I actually click through and go read that stuff is next to nothing.
Sure.
But knowing it's there, and especially when I'm like, wait, is that really right? Or like, do I really trust it? Having the option to go verify it yourself increases the level of trust.
100%.
Using the app.
And the other thing, we're going to be very like, I'm going to try not to overuse the word transparent when I talk about Stone's AI, but we're going to be very upfront with the user. It's like, do not quote the LLM if you're doing research. Please cite the actual source material. Do not cite us. We are not, like, hey, we're just basically providing this information to you. Do not cite us. Cite the source material, because that's what's relevant.
Yeah. Good. I love the grandioseness. I want to come back maybe later if we have time and talk about, like, your first customer, your first build, something huge like that from a product perspective. Like, what's the first thing you'd build? But we're going to come back to it, because first I want to talk about when you think about those first builds now. You've been in this industry for a while.
Yep.
You've been through a couple companies. You've seen some good times. You've probably seen some bad times.
More bad than good.
So tell us about a time when a product strategy or launch did not go well.
Sure. And I'm going to do my best to, like, simplify, because I really like simple concepts. I'm a simple person. I say this all the time, I'm never going to be the smartest person in the room, and I actually don't enjoy being the smartest person in the room.
I'm into that.
I want to like asking dumb questions. I was literally on a client call yesterday, and everybody else on there was way more in it with governance than I was. And I go, hey guys, I'm going to ask the dumb question. What is this? And then they started explaining it, and my head of compliance literally sent me a Slack message. He's like, thanks for asking that, because like that opened up like 6 other questions that I didn't had. And I was like, cool. I just like didn't know what you guys were talking about. I was like just trying to follow. But what I will say is, generally speaking, when I've had products that have not been successful, it's because I've put the cart before the horse. And now let me unpack what I mean by that. Is generally, it's that I have not done enough research to understand the problem and the consumer well enough and what their true need is, understanding the difference between a problem that is a pain and needs a painkiller versus a problem that needs a vitamin.
Ooh, okay. Killer versus vitamin.
Painkiller versus vitamin is really, really important, right? Because everybody, if you're in pain, will take a painkiller. Everybody should take vitamins. Does everybody take vitamins? No. They don't, right? So you want to chase painkillers if you can. And then if you have done those couple things, let's say you have done your research, the other place that I've gotten in trouble, and this has been like decade plus of like learning all these things and a lot of trial and error, is that we started coding before we really understood what the right solution needed to be to solve the problem the way the customer wanted it solved. Yeah. And so sometimes that's because pressures from executives or leaders in companies are saying, hey, we need this out. Hey, we have this idea. Hey, we have the budget. Start using the budget, start building. Or sometimes it's because you feel like you have enough information and so you're just like, oh, we have enough information. We know what we need to do. So one of the big things that I tell aspiring product managers or young product managers that I mentor is that, like, chase the value and make sure you really, really understand the value in all facets of that. Like, and what I mean by that is, like, what is the problem? If you really understand the problem, then you'll understand what the value is, understand what the ideal solution is for that customer. And then nobody can build an ideal solution because ideal solutions do not exist. So then how are you, go out and test different designs, different iterations of the product without writing any code. Like, do this in the leanest. I'll give some examples of like ways I've done that in the past. Go test that in the market with people that you hope to be real customers as frequently and as often as you can before you start coding, ideally. And even when you start coding, continue to do those testing. That testing and iterative process in the market and learning from the market is the most important thing. This took me a long time to get to this place because when I was younger, a very typical young product manager where I thought I knew everything and I was kind of alpha type, and that is like the worst place to be. And life will beat you down and tell you that is not the right way to do that. And now I have a saying, and I will say this to anybody. I say this to executives when I come in and do consulting for them. I've said this in the past as like head of product talking to founders or to board members. They will give me opinion like, hey, we should go build this or we should go build this. And I'll ask them questions about like, hey, what's the customer? What's their problem? What are we trying to address? Like, it's a cool idea. I'm not saying it's not a cool idea, but like, what are we trying to address? And they may or may not have that information. And at the end of the day, if they keep pushing on it, I go, like, I like it. We will keep that in our backlog. But at the end of the day, your opinion doesn't matter. My opinion does not matter. The people that buy your product, your service, they're the opinions that matter.
Right.
And if you're not learning from them, then you're not really learning about your problem. You're the market, the customer out there.
The only opinion that matters is the market's opinion.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I like that.
I think so. I mean, listen, the other thing that's really true is there's no absolutes. So is that an absolute truth? No.
Right.
There's always the Henry Ford thing, like, oh, well, everybody, wanted a faster horse, and I went and bought a car, and now we have cars.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, that is true, but ultimately he was really addressing the need. And the problem. He just was a visionary in the way that he was trying to solve it.
Well, and to your point, especially with software now, I think this was a lot harder in the industrial ages and in the manufacturing space, hardware manufacturing space of sorts. But with software, it's actually very easy to, if we do develop a new car that's going to be competing against the horse, it's very easy to test that concept in software so that you might be giving them something out of left field that they never imagined, but you can still relatively cheaply and quickly test the market's feedback on that new wild idea. And people don't like change, so there may still be some, like you said, some nuance there as far as, what the heck is that thing on wheels coming down the street? But so you have to sort through that nuance with your experience and everything, but...
And you're actually hitting on one of the core things of like people not liking change and are they willing to pay for it, is like that's kind of the core thing of whether it's a painkiller or a vitamin. Right? Okay. Like a vitamin, maybe I'll buy it. Maybe, if I have some extra money and it's kind of cool, maybe I will. A painkiller though, like you're going to go address that. If you have headaches for days on end, you're going to address that. Almost at any expense because you just can't live life that way. And so really understanding that when you're trying to figure out a problem space that you want to go to. And the other thing I would say too, and I mean, I heard this in your last podcast, and I'm sure this will be a resonating theme in a lot of podcasts because I feel like it's fun. It's one of these is like almost a fundamental truth is don't like fall in love with your original idea. It's cool to fall in love with a problem and really understand that problem and wanting to solve it. But like, how many companies do you know that like have pivoted 2 or 3 or 4 times to get to the ultimate idea that is where it is? I mean, if we get back to it, Stone's AI is on the 6th iteration of our idea. And now we're at the coolest place of it. But this is not where we started a year ago. We were in I was chasing a completely different thing. Ultimately, kind of the same problem at the end of it. But I didn't even understand the problem enough when we started chasing it a year ago.
Yeah, let's maybe come back to that if we have time. So all these learnings that you've got, I mean, you learned some of these things through hard experiences. You want to share one of those? What happened? Like what went wrong in a really concrete way that some of this stuff?
Well, so I mean, I think this company is maybe still around.
We can quack it out.
So I was head of product at a retail startup here in Dallas called. We had 2 different product lines. We had one that was called Dimming and the one that was called Sense. And Dimming, we had clients for, and let me explain what each one was. Dimming was, it was a computer vision based company. So computer vision AI is what we did. Dimming used robots to roam up and down aisles in retail stores and then give you information about what's going on, mostly around inventory management. So it would tell you if things are in stock or out of stock and then give you alerts to like go fill.
Was in the store? like with the people?
Yeah, so it was actually a really cool concept. It was extremely hard to pull off from a manufacturing perspective, but it was actually inside of a tube. So think of like a bank teller tube.
Okay.
Like, like that shoots, So it was like that, and the robot was in the tube and ran up and down the tube, and then you'd mount the tube on an aisle. Okay. Or, I mean, you wouldn't have to mount it you can mount it anywhere.
Yeah.
You could suspend it from air. You wanted it to, you could put it anywhere. You wanted it to be above because you didn't want people to mess with it. You didn't want carts to hit it, people to kick it, kids, things like that. And so then the robot would run up and down it, had a couple cameras on it, and it would look out and then take pictures and videos and give you alerts on what's going on, right? Conceptually really cool. Extremely hard manufacturing to pull that off. Extremely hard manufacturing to pull that off. But we had clients that were interested in it, and we were iterating on it and doing things, right? And so we had that product line.
That was Deming.
That was Deming, and then we had Sense, and Sense was another like conceptually cool idea where it fit, where Sense, and honestly, to some degree, Deming had this problem too. But Sense, where the biggest problem was, and I guess let me explain Sense. Sense was using projectors or projected light and computer vision to turn things interactive. So like I have this cup, right? And we could project light onto this cup, and then you could come up and touch different parts of the cup, and then that would trigger something. Okay. Maybe it was a video on a TV screen. Maybe it was a sound. Maybe it was, if it was sophisticated enough, could trigger something inside of an app. Or if the object was big enough, then we could actually put a little screen on the object. Like if it was flat, like your computer is terrible because it already has a screen, but ideally like a flat sort of like a table was a good one. So you could press it and you could make the whole thing a screen and touch.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually really cool. I'm realizing all the furniture in IKEA, if it had like touchscreen, and you could like check the product details or manufacturing details or whatever.
Agreed. It is conceptually a really cool conceptual thing. It was always very impressive at conferences where we do demos. But this is one of those things where the founders and the leaders of the company got enamored with the coolness of the idea. And not on the practicality of the business aspect of the idea. So when you start rolling this back, you're in a retail store where we were chasing, and there's a couple different ways you could have solved this problem, but we were chasing retail specifically. Retail runs off of super thin margins, right? 2 to 3% margins. They're very, very thin. Everything is very tight across the board, right? A projector, especially like a 4K projector, to get you like, a lot of pixels in a small area, so you can do a lot of cool things. They're running, especially like the kinds that we were selling, between 15 and 20K a piece. So one display, just the projector is 15 to 20K. But then we have to add in our compute, because we had a computer that was there. Everything was localized, right? So we had our own compute there. We had to put in a camera, a nice like $200, $300, maybe a $500 camera, depending on how far away we were, what kind of things we were trying to do with it. So all of a sudden you're talking about like a $25,000, $26,000, $27,000 for one projector, right?
One setup.
And
a retail store ideally is going to have like what, 50?
You would want a bunch of them. Yeah, think of IKEA. You'd want them on like everything. How expensive would that be? You're talking millions of dollars to fit one store. That's wild. It doesn't scale out, right? And this was something I would constantly bring up. I'd be like, the unit economics of this just doesn't make sense. Like is it conceptually cool? When people come in, are they impressed? Because like we would do it with car dealerships, we could project onto a car hood. Okay. And then the car hood was interactive. Same thing, you could learn about the car. Yeah. By touching the hood, and they would like hit the engine, it would like play the sound of the car, and like cool. Conceptually, very cool stuff, right? And cars, a little bit more margin, higher price items, so kind of worked a little bit.
Better product market fit for that.
A little bit, but at the end of the day, what you're competing with is somebody that's going to go buy a $50 Samsung tablet and put it right next to the car and do all of the same things, right? You're not going to win. Right. As cool as your idea might be, and it might be the coolest idea, at the end of the day, somebody on the other side is going to make a business decision. Right. It's going to go to a CFO, and the CFO is going to go, to what? Yeah. I'm not putting $5 million into one grocery store.
Well, and back to your point, if retail is the target, like that's totally the wrong target market, because you might be able to sell that to the showroom in the Porsche HQ somewhere overseas, where they don't care, like cost is not a factor. It's all about, the whiz bang.
Yeah.
Ever, but not retailers.
Right. Well, and that was the thing we ran into is we were selling like onesie, twosie POCs to people that would like just want to do one as like a showcase thing, just like, hey, because we can do it.
Right.
But you can never reach mass scale with it. You're never going to sell 500 units to anybody or any of these type of things, right? And then the other thing that was really tricky with it is because conceptually programming the touches and the interactions is not like programming a screen, because what you're dealing with, if this is projected light onto here, you're actually dealing with depth. So instead of this just being a touch screen and you're just programming if they touch, I'm actually programming depth when they touch a certain.
Way more complicated
To deal with, to build a user interface and then to then translate that into how that touches. And so there was just so many things that it was like, it'd take us 3 to 4x, and you had to have a specialized designer, and it was 3 to 4x longer to build a design and all these things. And then, and then at the end of the day, we would go talk to whomever it was, Kroger or anybody, and they'd just be like, yeah, but, like I have all my designers can design on the $50 tablet like tomorrow. Yeah. And you're going, yeah.
So what happened? So like we found that the company starts to get this feedback from the market. The market's opinion starts coming in and says, Sense is maybe not right for us. Demi might have a better fit or whatever. What happens?
Yeah. Well, so what happened was, as head of product, I felt it was my duty to kind of put this data forward and fight for the fact that I felt we should suspend work on the Sense product line and focus all efforts, because we were in essence had a huge burn rate monthly. And as a young startup, huge burn rate's not fantastic, right? Even though we were dealing with hardware, you can get bigger raises because you're dealing with hardware. It's still not great to have that kind of burn rate.
Bigger raises from investors.
From investors, yes. And so I advocated very strongly for many months to abandon Sense, put all of our efforts into dimming, kind of reduce our burn rate, and really focus on the thing that felt like it had legs. It was going somewhere. That opinion was not accepted by some of the leadership and led to a somewhat amicable departure from me from the company. And then ultimately what happened is that company was unable to secure funding for the next raise that they needed because investors were also telling us all of the same things, which is like, hey, you have one product line that is kind of making money. This other one is not. Why are you still putting money into this one that's not making money? So that is the learning lesson ultimately from that is not falling in love with your baby. Like that's what happened. They fell in love with their baby.
The solution.
With the coolness, with the novelty of this idea. And listen, in 5 or 10 years, if projector cost comes down, all these costs come down, would that be a viable solution? It might be, maybe, just not right now. And so they didn't listen to the market. They didn't listen to, leaders like myself, investors and other folks that were trying to tell them like, don't go after this, pursue the idea that it's working, and ultimately just not listening to the market. And
to be fair, like you said, it's difficult as a visionary, right? Because again, back to the horse car analogy, it's like, it can be very difficult sometimes to know when you're seeing the future.
Right.
That other people just don't see.
Right.
But in the end of the day, like the money's going to make that decision for you.
Yes.
So in some sense, even if you are looking 20 years ahead of everybody else, you still have to figure out how to survive right now so that you can realize that vision in the future.
Right. 100%. That's very well said.
For you in your shoes, what could you have done better? As far as communicating that message.
6 million things I could have done better.
Just pick the one key.
Yeah, no. So like, I'll just name a couple and then we'll dive into one. Like one, my methods of communication were not great on how I did this. And especially at the end when I was very frustrated, I definitely did not communicate as professionally as I could have, which led to the somewhat unamicable.
What's like make that really tactical for somebody listening?
Right.
What advice would you give somebody in that position?
Yeah. So the one thing that if I were to do it over again that I would have done is I was really stressing my points from a market. So I was using as much data as I had, but I was really doing that from a market perspective, right? And like, hey, this is what we're hearing from customers, this is what we're hearing from investors, blah, blah, and all that kind of information, you know, and some of it was I had a little bit of the financial information in it, but that's what I did not leverage enough. I should have leaned way harder into the financial data and said like, hey, just looking at this from a pure unit economics perspective, macroeconomics for these retailers, this is just, it's not a technology that's viable for their type of budgets, and should have leaned really, really, really hard into that. Instead, I really leaned on the market side, and the counter was always, even against the odds with all of this data that I had, which customer provided data, right? And all these kind of things, there was still the founder going, yeah, but they just can't see how great this is. Versus had I leaned into the financials really, really, really hard, it would have been like, hey, you may be right that this might be the next great thing, but the financials just don't work, period.
Okay.
You know?
So in my tech world, and I'm sure they say this a lot probably in product world as well, but it's all about data-driven decisions. You got to have the right data.
You have to have the right data.
Because in your case,
yes,
you had this market data, which I'm going to sort of generalize here into buckets. It was sort of, so like the stick and the carrot, it was sort of like this stick-oriented data of, hey, people don't like this, the feedback's negative, whatever. But that's data based on an opinion, which is important. But for your situation, it was like, yeah, but I needed the data for the carrot, which is the financials. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's still a little bit of the negative side too. It's like, hey, the financials don't make sense in this case.
Right.
Maybe it would have been an easier sell to be like, hey, look over here. You could make 10x financially on this side. That might have been a better incentive, or at least an additional one to help paint the whole picture.
Yeah, 100% agree. And then the other aspect, which there was no way for me to know this at the time, so I don't even know if I'd call this a lesson learned. It is a lesson learned for me now to be more kind of aware of these things going on, but there was a lot of in-house politics things going on between the founders that I was not necessarily privy to. I mean, like you kind of know, but you're going, oh, that's just, you know, like kind of founder thing where they're disagreeing, but ultimately everybody's going to align to move forward. Didn't understand how like fundamental the rifts were at some of the founder levels. And so, you know, like the way I was approaching and the communicating to some of the founders, but maybe not all of them, I probably could have been a better job about being more open and communicative across the board with more people instead of trying to go after specific leaders.
Interesting.
You know, again, I felt like I was doing the right thing. You know, that's a hindsight's 2020 thing. I wouldn't have known that until afterwards, and it is what it is.
I feel like that's also a tough balance, to be fair, because I've been in work cultures where there's a big push for individual alignment first, like before you go into big meetings, which I get, but I feel like that can if you're not very careful, that can devolve into, you know, what is essentially tribalism and gossip and one of these negative impacts of like, well, I just got to convince this one key decision maker and not include anybody else in that process, and that just never ends well.
Right. Yep.
So this learning, you said there was an amicable, for the most part, departure. Were you able to take these learnings forward to the next company and apply them and get a success?
I took the learnings forward. Did I get a success? No. So the next thing I went and did when I left there is basically when I went and started Product Pal. So that was my own thing that I was starting. And the big miss that I had there, I really understood.
Well, first, quick synopsis on
what is Product Pal?
What is Product Pal?
So Product Pal, we were using a network of large language models to automate many of the routine tasks that product development teams face. So things like writing requirements, collecting market research. We were trying to create presentation decks, although at the time, like that was super hard and did not work very well. You know, and there's other various things like that. We were also trying to have it take meeting notes, so it can be like a product manager in the room at any meeting. So, you know, if I couldn't attend a Scrum call or a backlog grooming or something because I had a client call that I was doing a demo for or something, then the product manager could be in the room, you know, taking notes and maybe answering a couple easy questions about like the roadmap or whatever, right? Conceptually, I still believe it's a cool idea and fundamentally things that are needed. I failed in two major regards.
Okay.
One was a failure to see how quick the market was going to adapt. And what I mean by the market is the big established players within kind of product management software. So things like Atlassian with Jira, Confluence, things like that. And then as well, like Product Board. And there's a whole, all of those that are out there. I did not believe that they were going to adopt the new LLM because remember, this is like 2022 to 2023, and then kind of at the, we kind of ended at the end of 2023. So it was 2022, 2023. So ChatGPT was still pretty novel, relatively new, right? I saw the power of it really early. There was also still a lot of hallucinations at those times, more so than there is now. So that was tricky when you're writing requirements and everything we were trying to deal with. But anyway, I just didn't think that the market would adopt the tech as fast as they did. Good on the market, to be honest, great on the market for adopting it as quick as they did. And then the other thing that you would have thought by then I would have learned the lesson, but I spent too much money developing the product way too early because I wanted to have a prototype that people could start using. In hindsight, for me, that was not the right decision because and there's a little bit of
what is too much money, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, so I dropped personally, because I bootstrapped the whole thing, close to $200K into it.
Wow.
So
okay, to try to build that prototype.
Well, build the prototype, and that includes market research. We did service a few clients, but we didn't make money on them, so it cost us more to service. And then a bunch of failed go-to-market strategies. And so that's actually the biggest lesson learned. The prototype, had I got some of the go-to-market strategies correct, the prototype, investing in it, that could have eventually maybe panned out, and I might not have been the right decision, but I could have saved myself And so the biggest lesson for me there, and it's one that in hindsight I actually already know, and I guess I needed to learn the lesson a second time. And that's what I said before we got started. Sometimes I need to learn it twice before and not fail the third time. But I did not. And it comes back to the fundamental lesson, and what I'm doing different with Stone's AI. But I tried to do everything myself. I had brought on a CTO that was building it, but I tried to do everything else. Basically the CTO was building it, but I did product, I did marketing, I did sales, I did accounting, I did everything else.
Everything in that whole go-to-market strategy.
The entire soup to nuts. And that's not the right thing. I am not strong in most of those places. I am a decent enough product manager. I am not a marketer. That is not my skill set at all. I'm not even on social media, so the fact that I was trying to do social media marketing and don't know anything about social media should have been red flag immediately, right? And I'm decent salesperson, but I didn't, I should have probably leveraged an actual brought in a real salesperson to do it. I'm definitely not an accountant. Numbers are not my strength. I have 2 degrees in history. You should not ask me to do a spreadsheet. It's not a good idea, So that was the big thing. There was a lot of things that I did wrong, but ultimately it boils down to the one thing is I tried to do too much myself. And I will say that there's and this is a new trend, and I don't know if you guys have seen this on X or Twitter. I still call it Twitter, but I guess it's X now.
Yeah, whatever it is.
The new trend is solo entrepreneur thing. But what I will say about that, it's actually a really cool trend, and I really love that, but they are still not, in theory, doing everything themselves. Yes, it's one human, but what they're really doing is surrounding themselves with a whole bunch of really good systems. And that's the thing that I think I missed, is putting in a whole bunch of really good systems. Now, those systems can be human-led, they can be AI-led, they can be a hybrid of the two, but you need really good systems in place, and those systems need to be based on testing and learning as fast as possible, and then reacting to those learnings. And across the board, whether that's development or marketing or sales or whatever. And I was not doing a good job of that, even though I knew that lesson and did not apply that with Product Pal.
That's a good learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Also, I would say I can build, and we've talked about this and other times, but I could build Product Pal in a week now versus it took us a year to get a prototype at the time. Yeah. But that's just the advancements of technology.
Build it, I was gonna say you can build it in a week now. Number one, because the technology's moved.
Yeah.
I think also that probably your domain experience.
Oh, ton.
Was you were continuing to learn and deepen your understanding of the market, the problem, all that kind of stuff. In my world, there's this famous thing that like the JavaScript language was like written in a day or something, or 3 days or a weekend. The reality was though that he'd been like mulling on that problem for like years. And it just like, he was gathering, it was almost like internal requirements gathering for years. And then he finally sat down. And by the time he did, he had the requirements, the technical stuff, like the architecture was like in his mind. And so.
Yeah. And there's an aspect, you know, like literally this is like a new thing that I'm kind of dealing with within the last like couple months of like just being more introspective and trying to know myself. And I would say this doesn't apply to most people. I think this applies to me and probably there's a small subset of people this applies to, where because I was, and this is, you know, come from Product Pal, is like because I had been a product manager for so long, I thought I knew everything I needed to know to go build a product for product managers and product development teams. Whereas, and so I did market research, but I didn't invest enough time into that because I was like, man, I just know it. I've been in this, you know, I know the problems. And while, yes, I do know the problems, right, I don't necessarily know the right ways to relate those, to sell those. Decision makers that are not product people making decisions about products. That doesn't sound right, but you know what I mean by that. Right. Whereas, like, I think that's what's different about, like, and again, personally for me, I think a lot of times being an expert in the industry is actually a really good thing, as long as you come into it humble and willing to learn. And I didn't have that. But like what's helping with Stone's AI is because I don't know anything about GRC. And so like not knowing it, I'm embracing those weaknesses a lot more, and I'm doing a ton more research all the time. I'm into it all the time, like trying to read, trying to learn. Hired a head of compliance, one of the very first hires we did, because it was like, dude, I have to have somebody that knows this space. And so bringing in experts. And then again, big thing is not trying to do everything. We're hiring people or putting in systems to do all of the things. And I am kind of just architecting the idea and trying to solve problems for different people and spaces. And that's the better place for me to be instead of trying to do everything.
I think that's great. One of my clients challenged me at one point, because you're talking about AI and all this, and he said the thing that he thinks about every day is, with all of the changes in technology, what's not going to change? One thing that I keep coming back to is the magic of the team, is my silly way to put it. It's like, I get way more inspired sitting here talking to you about stuff, or talking to Noah about stuff, that in my head, it's like, well, maybe I'm inspired, maybe I'll do that today. But once I sit down with some people and they're bringing new perspectives to the table and all that, like, just the magic of working with other humans and solving a problem. And then, like you said, building out that team, because, hey, I can code, I can't do product though. And I pretend like one of the first mistakes I made is like, I wrote a launch guide to take products to market as a technical person to like try to promote my business. And it wasn't until a year later, I'm like, I have no business talking. Like, I don't know that space. Like, I know what it looks like from a code perspective. Right. But to try to give any advice beyond my subject matter expertise is just foolishness, you know?
Yep.
So I think you're 100% right that we might see more solopreneurs, and that's great. But I think that they are still going to maximize their value offering and what they can achieve with their products and their life when they have that good team around them and people that, and they, like you said, you actively seeking out, hey, I'm not an expert in compliance, let me go find that person. Hey, I'm not an expert in whatever, building the AIs, let me go find that person. Like, I think that's a great recipe for success.
Yeah. And I mean, like my founder is a CRO. He's been a CRO for a number of different big companies and startups. And I specifically brought him in as a founder because I was like, hey, at the end of the day, revenue is king. If you have revenue coming in, you can solve a lot of problems, you know? And some people don't like that, especially people that like are really like into the product or, you know, like those kind of things. They might not love it, but that's the reality of running a business, is if you have cash coming in, you can figure things out. So that's why, like, my founder is a revenue person. He thinks about revenue, speaks revenue. That's what he does. And so, you know, it was like, that's something I don't have to think about necessarily.
We're going to go connect some dots here. You brought up the painkiller versus the vitamin. What's going to get people through the clinic doors? It's the painkiller. That then gives you the opportunity to sell the true solution, which is actually better for them, which is the vitamin.
True.
And connecting with the company you mentioned, they had 2 product lines, right? And one was a clear winner for now. So using that to get sustainability in your business, kind of like the painkiller maybe, solving a real problem immediately, and then being able to work on the vitamin problem, the longer term play. Yep. It's just the smart thing to do if you want to survive.
Yeah, it is 100%. I agree. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. So,
okay.
Yeah, so a lot of lessons learned from Product Pal and that failure. But I will say, like, and I think that, you know, I have a few mentors, and almost all of my mentors say that they started the same way. It's very rare that a very successful business person, their first company did extremely well. Yeah. There are some people that crush it and nail it, and man, good on them for doing it. Maybe they got lucky. Maybe they did have all the right skills. But most of the time, you go through a couple, 1 to 2 to multiple failures, and then you figure things out, and it's like, okay, now I get how to do this. And
well, I guarantee you, even if they didn't have failed companies on their name, it was failed projects of some
sure,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, they were still there. They just might not be as obvious at face value.
Sure. I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's very rare that you find like Mark Zuckerberg that like his and then I don't know if that was his very first thing, but like his first like any kind of real scalable thing took off and did what it did. You know, that's a pretty rare, that's like less than 0.001%.
Well, and that's the other thing. It's like for all of us to be sitting around, I have this problem. I use a silly analogy of like we all grew up on Disney, where it's like, you know, one superhero, one princess, all this kind of individualistic thinking of like unless I'm Mark Zuckerberg, I'm nobody. And it's like you have to understand like those things. The Zuckerbergs and the Elons, and even Elon's maybe not a good example because he did have multiple companies and learnings along the way. But that's just so rare that for any normie like us to compare ourselves to that, it's just there's nothing healthy about it. There's nothing good about it. It doesn't get you up and get you to the gym in the morning like you were saying earlier. And for the rest of us, like this is the common story that is accessible to the rest of us. Like expect those failures, embrace them, work through them because that's how you're going to get to your eventual successful spot, whatever it is. And to go all the way back to Stone's AI, I mean, like you said, you're on your 6th pivot, right? So to have that open-mindedness of, no, I'm going to pivot 6 times. And this vision that I have now as a, you know, whether you're like young in age or young in the process, whatever vision you have now, expect that to change. And the more you can embrace that, the more you will probably end up in a successful spot.
I think so. I completely agree.
And so on those 6 pivots, I guess I did want to come back to, you have this grandiose idea for the compliance stuff.
Yeah, and I give you I gave you the tip of the iceberg. I didn't give you the rest of it, but yeah.
And so I wanted to come back to the question of like tip of the iceberg. Everything you know now, what's the first thing you're looking at building, or the first thing you're looking at doing? Like what's that first month 1, you know, under 10 grand, like that first little investment? What does it look like for you guys?
So I mean, we've been in this for a year. So I guess let me say it as like what we actually did.
Perfect.
In the first, you know, couple months, and this was with, I mean, literally no money. I bought a URL, you know, set up a website for nothing, you know, $50 hosting cost or something, $30 hosting cost, whatever it was. The website was complete garbage. It looked god awful, but like, hey, we had a URL that people could land on, you know, type of thing, paid for emails. But the first thing we tried to do was, and I don't know if this was necessarily the right way to do it, but it is a way to do it. There's I think a lot of ways to collect the market research, but in essence, we started with the market research thing. We did market research through actually trying to sell and get clients. And so what I mean by that is, where we started with the idea was we actually were just going to offer compliance audits. We were actually just going to be a service-based business. I always knew there was going to be some kind of like technology piece, but it was just like, hey, we're just going to go do compliance audits for AI governance. It was a new thing. There was a brand new ISO out that came out right at the time I was shutting down Product Pal called ISO 42001, which is the first. And for people that don't know, ISO is the International Standards Organization. It's kind of the globally recognized best in practice frameworks.
Okay.
So it was a brand new ISO that came out around what's called an AIMS, or an AI management system.
AI management system.
And so what that means is that is as much about the AI system as it is all of the processes and the governance that you set up around the system. So as much about the people as it is about the system.
Okay.
And so that had just come out. We were just going, like, literally all we were going to do was do compliance audits around ISO 42001. That was all we were going to do. So we went out and just tried to find some clients. We got lucky that I had a client that kind of got walked into my lap from a friend that referred me.
Okay.
Literally how it started and how I got into this whole GRC space is not any kind of like I had some grandiose idea. I literally had this friend that called me and she was like, hey, you know AI really well. You've been in AI. Do you know, could you help a client out with AI ethics? That was how it started. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Let me go can I, do I have
Chat GPT.
like, do I have to give you an answer right now or can I like go do some research? And so I spent a couple weeks doing research, went back and I was like, I don't know. I think maybe I could help him out a little bit, and had a couple calls with him. Thankfully, this client was amazing. They kind of like gave us the playbook of where we started. They gave us like the inspiration of the playbook. They told us about ISO 42001.
Okay.
Kind of told us like some of the things that they're looking at doing, and that all became back to what their ultimate problem that they were trying to solve, and a lot of companies are trying to solve. A lot of startups and mid-sized companies is they have these really cool AI systems that they're building. They're some proprietary, some of them they're leveraging other systems, and they are trying to sell to big enterprises like, let's say, Microsoft or Google or Amazon or Oracle, or pick whichever one you want, or the big brick and mortar businesses, whether that's retail or whatever. And those enterprise companies are asking these AI companies to go, hey, how do you prove that your AI systems are doing things ethically? Right. In essence, you're not going to like be stealing people's faces, or you're not going to be stealing people's information and using it nefariously, or whatever it might be, right? Okay. Cool. Like that's actually a legit problem. Right. I understand that because you can't. And in Microsoft now, they came out some point last year. I don't remember when it was, but they basically have an edict. If you're a certain type of AI system, you have to be ISO certified, or you cannot do business with Microsoft.
Yes, ISO 42.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And so like, the market is basically demanding that these companies prove that they're doing things ethically. Mm-hmm. So that was the thing that we're kind of chasing. And as we started chasing and sort of like unraveling the onion, we found more and more of the problem.
And when you were doing all that, did you charge for any of that work?
Not initially. Now we're in a place now with that same client a year later that we're going to do like an official audit, and we are going to charge them now. They're getting like the greatest price in the entire world for this audit.
And they've gotten a year of your time, not full time, but a year of time, like discovering that.
And we didn't spend a ton of, and it's not like we spent a lot of time with them, but there was a little bit of time here and there, gave them a little bit of guidance here and there. But yeah, I didn't charge them anything for last year.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so that's all. So over the course of the year, you're deepening your knowledge about it. Mm-hmm. You're doing kind of an official gig for them now on that front.
Yep.
But that's giving you this playbook. So you stood up a website.
Yep.
And then what are you doing because it sounds like you're kind of selling this audit service now. So what are you doing to get customers to that?
Right. So let me kind of unpack a little bit of like the bigger play, because this audit piece is part of it. And this is where like all of your listeners are going to be like, this dude's insane. What is he trying to do? And I'm going to go, you are absolutely correct. You have to be a little bit crazy to try to do something like this. So what we are actually doing is, we're splitting out Stone's AI. So there's going to be a core technology piece, which I talked about, which is the LLMs, the blockchain, this big repository.
Yeah, right.
So that's the core technology. That's going to stay as Stone's AI. We're splitting out all the compliance audits into a separate company. Right now, the working name is TrustStones. I do not know if that will be the name or not. TrustStones AI.
So watch out for TrustStones AI.
We'll see if that ends up being, the working name. We'll see if that ends up being the name. But ultimately what we're doing is setting up a holding company above that. Right. And then the holding company is basically what we're going to do is the core technology. Well, we are going to do this like, kind of typical LLM play where you can pay a monthly fee, and then you can have access to it in so many tokens and you can do so many queries and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. The very standard like kind of LLM play that Claude and ChatGPT and everybody's using. So we'll have that. We'll also, but the big thing we're going to do is monetize the API, and because we actually want to fuel the GRC industry to stand up other businesses tied into our core technology. That's the bigger play. And so Stone's Holding, which is going to be the holding company, is then going to stand up vertical businesses to plug into this core technology to go address certain things. So for instance, like TrustStones is going to have its own audit management system that we're building, leveraging this core technology, and then building their own software suite, but then be able to offer services and technology to clients. And then, so if you have a cybersecurity business, you want to tie into it. If you are in fintech and you want to tie into the regulations, you could do that. Name whatever vertical you would want to tie into this, that use this, and we want to elevate other businesses to be able to go solve the problems. And we're just kind of this core repository, that knowledge base that they tap into.
Okay, so let me see if I got this right, because we need a visual.
I know, I have like an org chart, but
Send me a picture afterwards and we'll overlay it or something.
I'm absolutely not doing that. It is not ready yet.
So it sounds like, I'll try to boil it down here. So it sounds like you've got let me put it this way. You've got the services company where you're providing that just as an audit service now. As you build up the product, you will just eat your own dog food, use that product to provide that service better, faster, harder, stronger.
Yep.
And then that's kind of the generic solution, I'm going to say, because then as you do that, you can basically go target verticals. And as you learn more and get deeper into certain verticals, you're able to say, hey, like, yeah, we have this generic service, but the legal industry needs a very specific sort of version of this.
Correct.
So then you can set up more companies after that to go tackle that, using the same engine, using kind of the same base, but platform, whatever we want to call it. But then there'll be sort of these like forward deployed units specific for those industries. And sounds like it's maybe even open ended, like some of that you guys might do, but maybe that comes in the form of partnerships where larger legal industry, they're like, hey, we just want to, it's almost like white labeling. It's like, we want to be able to provide that service. So you can sort of help them build that.
100%. Yeah. We won't stand up all the verticals. We'll do a lot of partnering. We also have this idea, which hopefully I'm not going to get in trouble with my founder for throwing this out on a podcast, but we also are probably going to start up a boutique venture studio underneath Stone's Holding to like fund other entrepreneurs. And be like, hey, we'll give you a small investment. You come build into a specific vertical. You have this cool idea. Because one of the things that, again, trying to really lean into from all the learnings I've had up to this point, still learning a lot and a lot that I still don't know, but it is that really trying to embrace my weaknesses, which is that like, I can't no one person can execute all this. It's too big of an idea to try to execute with one person. So for instance, like I already have it's
like crowdsourcing.
It is like crowdsourcing. That's actually where I kind of got the idea from. It's kind of like that. But I already have a transition plan for the CEO for Stones AI. And I will not be the CEO for TrustStones. So when we split it out, we're actually going to go hire somebody to come in and run TrustStones. I have a transition plan that I'm going to take it through the first round of raise and kind of through the market launch. And then I'm going to bring in a CEO to replace me, and I'm going to move up to the holding company. And then I've already worked on a transition plan to replace myself as the CEO of the holding company, and I'm just going to move to chairman of the board.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not going to run any of these.
Into an island in the Caymans.
A ranch, but yeah, sure.
Or a ranch in a
ranch somewhere.
Northeast Texas or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or we'll see how it works out. But what's, and to tie back to like, how did we kind of get to where we are now? So started with a website with almost no money put into it, right? And we just went out, started having conversations, and like we had a conversation with that one client. We had conversations with other prospective clients. Most of them we did not win because I didn't know what I was selling. Right. And you learn a lot by getting told no on sales calls. That's why I love taking sales calls. I love them, even though I'm not the best salesperson. I love it because I learn a lot every time I get told no or you don't have a correct understanding of it. Those are learning opportunities. But we had
you find, to pause on that, when they tell you no, are they pretty transparent about here's what you need to go work on, here's why this doesn't work?
Almost never. And you can sometimes pull it out of them. You can sometimes ask follow-ups and get to it, but rarely no.
So that's a skill of sort of reading between the lines and being like, okay, they said no, here's why I think they said no.
Yeah. Well, and you can kind of dissect it based on where you get into the process. Like, for instance, if they're saying no before you even show them pricing, before you even show them kind of anything, it's just like conceptually, it's no. Kind of at the beginning, you're like, okay, well then I'm not even positioning the value props in the correct way for them to even be interested. So you might not know where the value prop message is wrong, but you at least know like it's in that area. And then you kind of overcome that hurdle and like, okay, we've got past the value props and we've moved along. And then, eventually you get no's at the pricing and you go, okay, well, that tells me my pricing is too high. They're not telling me how much it's too high, but at least I know I'm too high. So then you can start playing with it on the next one. It's same as everything, right? It's testing and experimentation. Yeah. The more calls you can have, the more conversations. So if you start at a certain price and you bring it down $5K and you're still getting no's and you're like, okay. And then sometimes you realize, well, it's actually not the price. It's the way we're positioning that price to them and the value that and then sometimes it comes back to the beginning, like all iterative things, right?
Yeah.
You get down far enough and you go, oh, was the value prop still, and we're still not selling the value prop well enough and all these things, right? Okay. But the point I was getting to is like we had all these conversations and we have brought on a few clients. We've done some audits with Stones AI, which will be again Trust Stones when we split it out. And really learning from those clients. Like, I don't know, every one of our clients that we've had has asked us if we provide more services than just the audits. And so we really listen to like what are the things they're asking for. And this led us to this big idea for all of GRC because they're asking for like X, Y, Z. And it's like, man, I didn't even think about that being a problem. And you start putting all of this information, all these learnings together over a year, and you're like, oh man, people have a lot of problems in this space, and there's a really big problem here to go chase. And so
I think it's so smart as a product strategy. I wrote down basically domain expertise audits. If you can become a domain expert and then just start giving audits out, even though there's no software behind it yet, there's no SaaS product behind it yet, you do that enough and SaaS products will start to fall out. If you're thinking that way, if you know about that space, right?
Yep.
You will gain a ton of product ideas just by being the domain expert and sharing that domain expertise with folks.
Right. And I mean, at the end of the day, like, again, we talked about a lot of things, but to boil it down to really simple concepts, and it's something that I've heard you talk about a bunch, but it's like, and you mentioned even just a minute ago with teams, but it applies to like customers and just have more conversations. At the end of the day, have more conversations. You will learn a lot from any kind of and have conversations with anybody and everybody, not just like prospective clients. Have them with people. You'd be surprised how many things I've got from my wife and she doesn't know anything about product or GRC or anything. Yeah. And because you're just like, if I have to explain it to her and she's still not getting it, you're like, okay, I've made this too complex. Even if like she's not an ideal customer, just have more conversations all the time. Yeah. Even right now, I know the way I'm like telling you, because this is a relatively new idea that's happening within the last couple months, I'm still not dialed in on the pitch on like how I relay this to people. Yeah. It's going to get better. I need to have more and more of these conversations. Yeah. So like hopefully if we do a follow-up a year from now, it's going to be even more dialed in. Yeah. A year after that, it'll be even more dialed in. Yeah. Let's end on that note then maybe because I always think like, when should I follow up with this person? Like, what's the next big thing, milestone that you're going after that would be a good time for me to check in? Yeah, so we're going to have, we're hoping to have the beta out it'll be a free beta for the core technology. We're hoping to have that out in Q2, assuming we stay on schedule. And then of 2025? Yeah, of 2025. And then we're going to do a raise mid-year, hopefully to have the raise completed mid-year or so. And then we're going to probably try to finish up the beta and start getting into a place where we monetize some of those clients from the beta towards the end of this year. Don't know if that's going to be maybe the end of Q3, but it'll probably end up in Q4 sometime. So I think, around this time next year would be a good place for follow-up on Stones specifically and like how we're doing, because I can tell you like, how did we do with all of these milestones we're trying to hit, Yeah. So I think that would be a good follow-up is probably around then. If we want to talk about other things in between then, happy to do this again. But for Stone specifically, it's probably a year from now will be a good follow-up. There is easily 4 or 5 rabbit trails that I had to stop myself from going down. Yeah. There's so much good stuff to talk about. Thank you so much for coming on. Yeah. Good conversation. It's fun. I can't wait to put it out. Yeah. Great, dude. Thanks, man. Thank you.